you, more than any other guest on here, really typifies the kid in The Emperor's New Clothes, that famous Hans Christian Andersen. Do you know the fable? Do you know the story?
Of course.
Right. I mean, you're it. You're it, except it's not a naked king on a horse. It's a full-grown man with the entire accoutrements that God blessed him with, wrapped in skin-tight women's clothing, with his phallus clearly visible. And the townspeople are all gathered, and they're all looking, and no one is saying anything. We're just waiting for the kid to go, "Hey there, quick point of order. But does that woman have a penis?"
I waited for so long because I thought someone else would. I mean, the months between November and March, I figured someone would say something. There's no way that people will just remain quiet. I mean, there's people whose job it is to protect us. Surely they'll protect us, right? What about our coaches? What about people within the NCAA? What about maybe some other swimmer will say something? I naively thought that they would.
When did you truly realize that no one was coming to speak on your behalf?
You mentioned the scenario where we tied, which very briefly, we raced in the 200 freestyle. So, got on the blocks, swam 8 laps of freestyle, touched the wall at the end. I look up at the scoreboard, and almost impossibly enough, we had gone the exact same time down to the 100th of a second.
That's statistically, almost impossible.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. Very rare. I mean, you can't even get out your phone and try and stop a stopwatch in less than a tenth of a second. You can't do it. And we went the exact same time down to the 100th. And that's incredibly embarrassing for a 6'4" man. But nonetheless, we get out of the water, go behind the awards podium where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself, again, him towering over me. And this official says, "Great job, you two, but you tied. And we only have one trophy, so that trophy goes to Leah. Sorry, Riley, you don't get one." And I remember my heart rate was still high, having just competed. My adrenaline was still pumping. And so the first thing that I thought ended up being the first thing that I said. And the first thought that I had was, isn't this everything that Title IX was passed to prevent from happening? What do you mean you're going to give the trophy to the man in the women's 200 free? He tried to come up with a couple different excuses. The first thing he said was, we're just doing this in chronological order.
What chronology?
To which I said, okay. I said, do you mean alphabetical? Because G comes before T. Otherwise, I have no idea what you're being chronological about. We tied. And that's when he admitted, and understand he said this with a sad face. His voice sounded sad. I could tell he didn't even believe what he was about to say, but he looked at me and he said, "Riley, I'm so sorry, but we have been advised as an organization that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy's in Leah's hands." That's the moment when we knew, like I said, we knew all season the unfair competition was wrong. We knew the locker room, the silencing, we knew those things were wrong. But it wasn't until this official reduced everything that we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a man at the expense of our own. That's when I was no longer willing to wait for someone else. And a vivid memory where I'm standing on that podium holding this trophy I know I have to give back, sharing my placement with a guy towering over me, and it hit me. This realization of how in the world could we as women, as female athletes, expect someone to stand up for us if we aren't even willing to stand up for ourselves? This has to come from us. So it was right then and there I decided I would say something, and the next day I did.
What would you say to men? Because I hear a lot that, this whole thing, as crazy as it sounds, I hear a lot of people saying, where are the feminists? Where are the women who can just come together and shut this thing down hard. Like, why hasn't that happened? And so I guess it's a two-part question. Why hasn't that happened? And what should men do who feel sometimes relegated just to watch because we don't get a say in it, right? So, I mean, make sense out of that for me.
No, I totally know where you're coming from. To answer your first question of where are the feminists, don't even get me started on this question. We have people like Billie Jean King, right? I mean, this is who we have to accredit Title IX to. She played in the Battle of the Sexes and she won, and it was this huge feat for not only women in sports, but women as a whole, women in the working field. I mean, it propagated women. Billie Jean King is now advocating for male inclusion in women's sports and women's spaces. Megan Rapinoe, for example, this is a woman who says her greatest achievement of her entire career was fighting for equal pay. She's now actively and openly, again, fighting for male inclusion in women's sports. You look at someone like Dawn Staley, even. This is the University of South Carolina basketball coach who just led her team to a national championship. I mean, her record the past 3 years at USC is 109-3. I mean, it's unheard of. It's unprecedented. So clearly she's a phenomenal coach, but you can be two things at once. You can be a remarkable player, a remarkable coach, and you can be a sellout. And that's what all of these women have proven themselves to be. People who claim to champion women. Even recently when I was testifying, I've testified before Congress and the Senate many times, but most recently, I was sat next to a woman. She was the president of the National Women's Law Center. And in her opening testimony, she said that women should just learn how to lose more gracefully to men. It's insane what these feminist groups are doing. They're leading the charge in dismantling our rights and sex-based protections. But I think we ultimately have the feminist movement to blame for the way that we have emasculated men. If you look at, these different waves of feminism, you look at the sexual reproductions, sexual liberation, these fights that feminists have undertaken. For so long, we told men, no uterus, no opinion. You don't get to give an opinion on an issue that affects women. And so I think they've listened and said, okay, this is your battle. You guys are being adversely affected by this. Now you handle it. But I will be the first person to say, first of all, it's not only affecting women. This affects everyone. But secondly, we need men. We need strong men. I think our nation is in decline for a couple reasons. One of which because we live in a godless society, but two, because we are governed by morally bankrupt, weak-kneed, spineless cowards. And again, virtually every realm. Academia, corporate America, our media, our government, even seemingly our spiritual leaders won't get involved in anything that has been deemed controversial by our media or society. But there's a saying, and it's proven itself to be true time and time again, and it's that hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. There's no doubt in my mind which part of the process we're in now, where weak men have created hard times. I think the last time we had a society full of strong men was in the 1940s. During World War II, you think about it. These were men who were willing to and actively lying about their age, saying they were older than what they really were so they could enlist and fight for this country. And now, 80-ish years later, you have men actively lying about their sex, saying that there's something that they're not in order to get into women's sports or women's prisons or women's locker rooms or women's bathrooms or women's dorm rooms or sororities or what have you.
And if you push back, if you push back, what is it now? It's not masculinity, it's toxic masculinity. And look,
right.
Not to make it incredibly personal, but even you didn't want your dad to come down and straighten that out. That I completely get. But I wonder, to your point, if it's 1940 or it's 1950 and the call goes out and there's a full-grown man in my daughter's locker room, My daughter's not going to dissuade me from coming down there, and neither is my wife,
way.
and neither is the
No
sheriff. I'm going.
No.
I'm
Exactly.
going.
And that's what we need to see. We need to see more parents willing to defend their kids, to defend their daughters, teach their sons how to be strong men. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
If you like what you heard,
And even if you don't,
won't you please,
pretty please subscribe. Well, I hate to beg and I hate to plead, but please, pretty freaking please, please subscribe.